over the summer, I had this image. I always take a walk before our sessions. And I think I shared with you that I often had this image of us, of our group, sitting around a well, what looked like like a wishing well. And the image was one of sort of looking into the depths of that and the depths of the water. And I notice it's, as things cool down a bit, temperature-wise, as the seasons change, that the metaphors, the images that psyche brings to us, that soul brings to us, can also change. And I notice I'm back to an image that came when we once started. And that was an image of us sort of sitting around the fire together, and really being warmed by that. And the fire being a symbol, really an archetypal symbol of transformation, and also a very important symbol of alchemy, where we heat up the materials in the vessel with our presence, with our compassion, with our kindness, with our curiosity, and ultimately the fuel for all of this work is that love of reality, that love of truth. And there's a lot of pain right now in our world, and a lot of confusion, and Chantel, yes, a lot of hate, anger, rage, deep heartbreak. And so I want to make sure that as we sit around the fire together, as we spend this time together today, that we really, the best that we can, to have an intention to hold one another, and really to welcome and to invite and to allow whatever it is that needs and wants to come into the field, that this field is large enough, it's spacious enough, it's rooted enough at this point. We've been together for a while now to really be able to contain that. And just to know that all of that feeling is valid and it's important. There's a way in our world, that we can spend so much time, our time and our energy getting out of that feeling of not having to feel, just not wanting to feel. And it's so understandable, in a way. But I think the invitation for all of us as we deepen on this path, as we do this work, is to cultivate that curiosity, that embodiment, that presence, to really turn toward ourselves in difficult times, to turn toward those figures of psyche, those pieces of soul that are longing to just for a bit of our attention, a bit of our holding. And that sadness that can be, of course, triggered by all sorts of events that are happening in the world, that deep rage, that sadness, that heartbreak, that hopelessness, that helplessness. A lot of that has been in the field, in the container, in the body, in the psyche for a long time. And events in the world have a way of really reopening those wounds. And so I just want to make sure that as we sit around the fire here together, that we each, as best we can, to offer and to hold that intention, to really allow what we need to feel that we're in a safe place here together. And that it might always, as we've talked about, it might not always feel safe. This work isn't always going to feel safe. It's not going to always feel safe. The spiritual path cannot promise that. But I think a couple comments ago that I can't share anymore, it's this, on the one hand, holding all of that grief and that pain and that sadness for our world. And on the other hand, many of you, I've heard from you, and many that I'm speaking with are also opening to something. There's something that's emerging out of that darkness as well. There's a light that's inside of that, a certain kind of light that really can be only accessed in times like this, in times of transition and liminality. And so it's sort of holding both of those. Like if we're paying attention to our dreams, there can be healing that comes from our dreams. There can be healing and transformation and opening that's coming from our work, from our practice. And we're really trying to hold that with everything that's happening in the world. And so it's a lot. So I just want to make sure that this place and this space, that everyone knows, that I know, that the unseen ones know. That it's all welcome, that it's all, we need this material, we need that grief. I know it sounds, from the perspective of the mind, it sounds a bit odd, or it's hard to sort of make sense of that, but we need that grief, we need that sadness, we need that brokenheartedness, because that is the path. That is the path that allows us to fully come into this life, into this world, and to truly and really be there with, for others who are suffering. And it's our quality of attention that's really, in the end, the most important. Where are we placing our attention? It's so easy in this world to become scattered. I think I've shared this before, but it's almost like there's a drip, a slow sort of drip of cortisol, of fear, of worry, of disembodiment coming out of the collective. And if we're not careful, right, there's a way that we can become tangled up in that. There's a way that we just become caught up. It's like a certain kind of trance, actually. And that's why taking time each day, even if we're really busy, it doesn't take long, but take time each day to pause, to slow down, to go take a walk, to be out in nature, to sit in our prayer room or our meditation room or wherever we go, on our couch, and close our eyes and feel our feet on the ground and feel that aliveness in our hands as they rest in our lap, and bring our awareness out of that collective trance and into the aliveness of the body, and listen and feel. Because if we aren't metabolizing these feelings as they arise in real time, it takes effort, it takes practice, it takes courage, it takes heart and a real trust, to metabolize, to process all of these feelings and images and impulses that come to us. And when we close our eyes and we look into that well, or we look into that fire, and we can connect with that at any time, that we might see something, we might feel something, we might come to some knowing of something, some way that the soul is communicating to us, is bringing something into our experience that we need. That's in that innate pull in the psyche that pulls us toward wholeness. But it does take practice. It does take effort to go against the grain, to go against the status quo, which is so oriented in that cortisol and that moving upward in the window of tolerance, into that sympathetic activation, into that fight flight energy, into that worry, into that shakiness. Or of course, the other side to that is that complete collapse. That state of dissociation, of collapse, of just shutting down from all of the stress, from all of the feeling, from all of the worry. I don't want to feel that. It's so understandable, so human. But we can find our way, we can find a middle way through that, where we spend a few moments, a few times a day, just checking back in, closing our eyes, scanning our experience, so we can really metabolize what it is that we're going through. So we're not going to bed every night with all of that unmetabolized, unprocessed, unfelt feeling, which could be sadness, rage, grief. It could be any number of things. Joy, unfelt joy, because that also happens in this trance of the collective. Moments of joy aren't able to actually, moments of play, of joy, of awe, of beauty, of wonder, which every human being, every human heart and nervous system needs for their well-being, for mental health, for physical health, is to have time each day to be in those more unstructured states that Winnicott calls them, which are all oriented at some point in play. Because when we start to move outside of our window of tolerance, upward into sympathetic arousal, downward into that dorsal collapse, shut down, that fatigue, we're not able to experience, to stay with, to be in those states of just the joy, not the joy of getting something that I want. That's fine too, of course. I hope you get everything you want. But I'm talking about a joy that's much more primal than that. It's much more primordial than that, a joy that's wired into our true nature. It's a joy, actually, that we might come to see that's always already here. It's part of what we are. It's part of this nervous system. It's part of this soul. It's that joy of just being. It's causeless. It's not a joy that is the product of accomplishing something or getting something or acquiring something or even getting into a particular state of consciousness or anything like that. It's the joy of being itself. And when things are chaotic, there's the two extremes. There's chaos on the one hand, which is that move upward in the window, right, into sympathetic, fight, flight, that cueing, that toning of where there's just where our nervous systems become tuned. They become toned to detecting cues of danger. And so we go through the day and there's that subtle sort of movement into that field of where's the danger, there's something around the corner, and we don't even realize it. That's that slow drip of cortisol where we start to detect that danger, that something's not safe. That's the chaos part. And on the flip side of that is rigidity. These two words come from interpersonal neurobiology from Dan Siegel. He talks about chaos and rigidity, which are just different ways to speak about that sort of sympathetic fight flight and the dorsal shutdown collapse. And we can cycle through those states during the day. And so one thing that we can do is just start to notice. And this is why slowing down, this is our core practice right now. Several times during the day, when we notice that we're activated, when we notice there's some activation, and then also when we're not aware of any particular activation. Slowing down, sitting down, feet touching earth, hands in our lap, awareness. I wonder what it is that I'm experiencing right now in my body without any interpretation. Feeling, image, impulse. It's more of a right brain sort of attunement to that flow of experience. It's not thinking about our experience. That's important too, later on, to reflect upon what's happening. But in those moments, to take a pause from all of the stimulation. I wonder what I'm experiencing right now without any interpretation. And then we move into that listening place, that state of receptivity, as if we were listening really carefully to that still small voice that is preparing to speak to us, because it will speak to us. And whether we identify that as the self or God or the divine or the beloved or the friend or the ally or the guide, or to being itself or to true nature itself, depending on which of those ideas and metaphors and images are most resonant for us, that the soul is speaking to us, but it's speaking in its own language. And it's not usually the language of words and concepts and that sort of rational process. The soul speaks to us by way of image, by way of feeling, by way of body, by way of our senses, by way of an impulse to move, to get up and move in this direction or that, to dance, to pull down an instrument off the shelf. This is those, Rumi speaks of those, that there's hundreds of ways, to kneel, to go to the ground, to kneel and to touch the ground, to kiss the ground, and to discover what that is for us. What is it for me? What is that unique activity, that activity in soul for me, in body for me, that allows me to come back down into that very center point of the window of tolerance? If I've been up in that worry, that anxiety, that stress, that cortisol, that adrenaline, that anxiety, which is our world, that chaotic, that chaos of the collective, that chaos side of the spectrum. Or we might specialize, so to say, in the other side, which is more of that shutdown, flatness, numbness, dissociative response, which is just shut down. It's just all too much. That's the rigidity side. To just become really familiar in our own bodies, what that is, what it feels like to begin to move upward into that fight flight, to move downward into dissociation and collapse, shutdown, fatigue. And it almost always begins in the body. There's almost that for most of us, we can begin to notice that process begins. There's some sort of sensation in the body that starts that cycle. And out of that sensation, then we might get more of sort of what we would call a full-blown emotion. And then out of that emotion, there can be some thought and reflection about that. But to start in the body, for some of us, it might be a slight tingling of sort of nausea or butterflies, in our belly. It could be some feeling of emptiness in our heart. Could be some constriction in our throat, or some way that our shoulders start to press down, or some subtle or not so subtle tears in the back of the eyes. It could be some way that there's some flush in our face or in our legs or in our arms, or some way that our legs start to get weak, or some tingling in our feet, or some shallowness in our breathing. We might just notice, I've been breathing in this shallow way up here in my chest almost all day long, and I didn't even know. Because there's that detection, there's that, and this is just a part of our world today. If we're not really mindful of that, that there's a way that we're subtly under the surface detecting cues of danger and threat. And in polyvagal theory, I'm sure some of you know the work of Steve Porges. He talks about this capacity of what does he call it? Neuroception. So it's not perception like with the mind, but it's a neuroception with the nervous system is also scanning all the time. And the nervous system, if it could talk, if it had a little voice, it would be saying, it really has only one thing to say primarily, and that's, is it safe? Am I safe? Is it safe? Is it safe to be me? Is it safe to be in this world? Is it safe to take a walk? Is it safe to open my heart? Is it safe to allow another human being, another person to matter to me? Is it really going to be worth it? Is it safe to be on a spiritual path? Is it safe to heal? Is it safe to heal? And it's not a question that we would ordinarily ask so much, but that is the question of the nervous system, which is just scanning. That neuroception is scanning. Is it safe? Is it safe to move toward? Is it safe to open? Is it safe to be vulnerable? Because in our close personal relationships, we want at times to be able to be open, to be naked before the beloved, to be vulnerable, to be in touch with our embodied vulnerability, and to lead with that sensitivity, to wear that sensitivity on the outside. And obviously, that's not always wise. That's not the most compassionate thing to do. That's not the wisest thing to do always. There are times when we do need to privilege our own safety and separateness, and to not lead with our vulnerability, but to lead with our own personal sense of integrity, with our own 2 feet on the ground, not going along with the world, not going along with the other, not privileging and prioritizing their views and perceptions over ours. And this sort of ties into what we were speaking to last time about how important it is, how vital, how life-giving, how essential it is for healing, for living a meaningful life, for living a life of joy, for living a life of presence, to be able to cultivate a conscious, embodied, compassionate relationship with our own anger, with our own separateness, with aggressive energy, with that family of aggressive energy that so many of us have split off from. So many of us that, and I've noticed that come to sort of a healing path, a spiritual path. This almost always comes up in therapy. Once we dig down a little bit underneath of, someone will come to therapy and say, well, this is why I've come. And of course, all I can do is validate that and honor that. Yes, this is why you've come. And there's always a part of me that is open to what it is, why is it that they've really come? What is it that's underneath that initial kind of narrative about what I'm doing here, why I've come? And inevitably, if it's a longer term sort of work together, that we will discover that some phobia, some dissociative energy, some disembodiment, some marginalization of anger, shame, rage, something in that family. Not every time, of course. It's not a formula, but in many more cases than you might imagine. Meaning it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And as we talked about last time, one of the reasons it's so important, because anger is a messenger. It's a message that's coming to us from the body, from the heart, from the soul, from the organs, from our cell tissue, from our being. And it's not anger. That's the problem. It's not anger that's a sin, that's a low vibration, that's unevolved, unspiritual. It needs to be healed, turned into something else. Transform your anger, get rid of your anger. Don't be so angry. Because all that does is push anger, which is a natural human experience and a very important one. But all that does, that dissociative relationship with anger, is it pushes anger deeper into the shadow. If we want to use psychological language, if we wanted to use more language from neuroscience, it presses and pushes that anger and all of the impulses and all of the images, into bodily and subcortical limbic circuitries where we can't reach it because it's unconscious. And that's what, when we talk about something being unconscious, all that really means, the unconscious isn't a place that we can visit and go to. The unconscious is simply, we could even think of it as a metaphor for experience, for something that's affecting my perception, my behavior, my capacity to imagine who and what I am, that I'm not immediately aware of. I'm not able to close my eyes and reflect upon it. If something's unconscious, it's beyond our capacity to reflect upon it. And so with a phrase that I know we've talked about, something like making the unconscious conscious or making the darkness conscious, it's opening a portal in which these energies, these feelings, these emotions, these impulses, and all of the unlived life, all of that unlived experience that's in each and every one of us, part of the process of growing into adulthood, growing out of childhood, requires that I think Robert Bly, maybe some of you know him, poet Robert Bly, he had this image of the shadow is like this bag that we sort of carry over our shoulder. It's this long bag behind us that we sort of walk around with. And throughout our lives, especially as children, but as we age, whatever we're unable to experience consciously, and that could be for whatever reason, it contradicts the image we have of ourselves, or it causes a disruption in one of our core attachment bonds. That experience becomes marginalized, dissociated, split off, and put in that bag. And so we get into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, some of us 30s, maybe not quite so much in our 20s, but we eventually come into adulthood, with this bag full of unlived experience, which was so intelligent at a younger time in our lives. It was intelligent to not have a direct, conscious, immediate relationship with these powerful energies: anger, rage, shame, sadness, fear, anxiety. Because if we allowed ourselves to experience those consciously, they would overwhelm us, they would shatter us, they would fragment our little sense of self. And so the only intelligent thing to do was to put those in that bag. But of course, putting them in the bag, putting our anger in that bag, doesn't make the anger go away. It doesn't heal the anger. It doesn't transform it. It simply stuffs it. And that anger will continue to poke its head up. It'll continue to come into our conscious, come into our experience in less than conscious ways, as passive aggression. It can, many people believe that certain forms of depression come from a situation of a lot of repressed and dissociated anger turned towards self. And I have also seen that. I'm not sure we can make a global case that all depression, that's certainly not accurate, but there are certain times when I've seen that. And when we can really start to get in touch with that anger, I can think of a person that I know in my life now is when they were really able to get in touch with that anger, that there's a way that depression lifts. There's a way that many of the symptoms that they've experienced, long-term sort of symptoms, have begun to lift. That getting in touch with that aggressive energy. And as we talked about last time, when it comes to asserting our own needs, really standing in our own 2 feet and privileging our own experience, enacting healthy boundaries, engaging in conflict when it's necessary, leading with our separateness when it's necessary, not just always being in some fused, merged unity, state that we fantasize to be compassion. You know, if I don't rock the boat, if I just go along with the other person, I just, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. If I just go along, I don't assert my own view. I don't say, hey, wait a minute, that's actually not accurate. I actually disagree with that. I actually feel disrespected by that. I actually need you to not do that anymore. I actually need to take a break from you. I need to enact a boundary. I need to assert myself. I need to say no. No. You know, how so many of us have come into adulthood just not able to truly do that. Or if we do that, it brings up so much anxiety and shakiness, and it's very difficult to stay in that. And because for so many of us, you know, we were forced into this role of being a caretaker earlier in our lives, where we had to take care of one of our parents, one of our caretakers, where it was our role in the family. Could be a sibling, could be a grandparent, uncle, aunt, family friend. But it was our role to sort of prop up that person's sense of self, was to go along with them, whatever they said. That was the safest, wisest, most intelligent, most compassionate, most adaptive thing that we could do, is to put that anger, to put that separateness, to put that capacity to engage in healthy conflict, to separate, to not fuse with the other. And there's a way that, you know, it can seem like that, to just go along, to not ruffle someone's feathers, to not, you know, is a certain way of, we're kind, that's being kind, that's being nice, that's being compassionate. And many of us who are drawn to healing and spiritual paths, I think, identify as kind people, nice people, compassionate people. But we have to be able to discern that sort of becoming an emotional doormat for the unloading of another person's unconscious process is not compassion. It might look like compassion on the outside, but it's not compassion. It's what it is what we call an enactment. We're just enacting some old neural patterning that is so deep inside of us, because it was the only way that we could stay safe as a young child. It's the only way that we could receive even a little teeny bit of affection, of attention, of love, a hug, a cookie, whatever it was.